Would you give a warm SATtalk welcome to Bob Lupton?
I have a friend by the name of Bill Mallory that has a spiritual gift. He didn't really recognize it as a spiritual gift for a long time, but it finally became clear. He has a spiritual gift of deal making. Now, he hadn't heard a sermon on that, but under the lordship of Christ, his deal-making ability has clearly manifested itself as a spiritual gift. Bill's an entrepreneur. He started out importing household goods, mostly from the Pacific Rim, for a national chain here in the States. And eventually he figured that if he went off on his own, he could do his own import business and sell to that chain and other chains. And so he took the risk and did it, and did very well. But over time, he became very concerned that it was hard to get to consistent quality in the materials that were being shipped, and also there were issues of timely shipping. A lot of times those shipments would be late, and in frustration, he finally said to his wife, he said, "I think I could do better myself." And she agreed. And so they bought a piece of land over in the Philippines, and he set up a manufacturing operation over there to manufacture various household goods that he had customers for here in the States. And that was about 12 years ago that he made that move. And I saw him at a Christmas party this last Christmas. And I said, "Bill, how's your business going?" He said, "Well, it's going pretty well." It says hard work, but yeah, he said we're doing well. I said, "How many folks you have working for you now?" He said, "Right at 3,000." I said, "You're kidding me?" He said, "Yeah, we had to open up a couple different plants, so now we have plants in 3 locations, 3 adjacent villages." And I said, "Man, that must have a real impact on the economy and the environment around here." He said, "Oh, it's noticeable." He said it's created probably that many auxiliary jobs, folks that are now making tacos to sell to workers, and guy's got a bicycle, now he puts a rickshaw on the back, and now he's got a motorcycle, he's in the taxi business. All those little businesses that grow up around a successful business. He says, yeah, he says having a significant effect on the economy. He said, we've had to make a lot of change. He said, initially, when we hired our workers, noticed a lot of them were coming to work with sweating and with shakes. It's tropical diseases. He said, you can't run a business with a sick workforce. And so he said, we had to provide health coverage, and found out that some regular medication, vitamins, et cetera, would cure up a lot of those problems. So we made sure everybody on our workforce had health coverage. He said, then women were bringing their little ones to work with them. He said, you can't run a business with babies around. And so he said we had to start a daycare for our workers. And then he said that he noticed that there were some older kids, middle school and a little younger, that were hanging around the outside, dropped out of school. He said that's not healthy for them. It's not healthy for your families. So he said, we're going to scholarship all of our employees so that their kids can go to school a full 12 years and graduate from high school. So took that educational initiative. He said after our startup, there were some years that The income was up and down a bit, but he said, we made some really good profits. And he said, I decided that my workforce was the whole reason that we could make profits. And so he said, I decided to set up a profit-sharing system so that when the company does well, everybody does well. And that's an incentive to work harder as well. And so he set up profit sharing. He said he started a Bible study with his employees, and that was good, but he's not a preacher, he's a businessman. So he hired a minister to kind of become a chaplain who would do the Bible studies in the morning, and that grew into a church that this minister, with Bill's help, started. And he said, we've got three churches started now. And he said, actually, we've just started up a small seminary to train ministers in the Philippines. He said, and I'll tell you something else. He said, other employers in the area are seeing what we're doing, and we're just making good business decisions. And he says it's raising the bar so that they're needing to pay their employees more, and they're needing to pay certain health care benefits. He said it's raising the bar, and he said it's noticeable. It's noticeable. You could send missionaries into that region for the next 100 years, and they would never have the impact that one business person would have who wanted to run his business successfully and under the lordship of Christ. He has a spiritual gift of deal making, and he's never heard a sermon on that. It's a default mechanism. Paige, his wife, can tell you what it's like to live with a serial entrepreneur. It's the kind of guy that comes home late at work, late in the day, has a briefcase full of papers. He should be paying attention to his wife. Instead, he's reading these papers. He's distracted. He's up late reading his papers and finally goes to bed after midnight, kind of crashes, and then his eyes pop open at 5 o'clock in the morning. He's jumping out of bed and heading off to chase a deal, grabs a cup of coffee. He might chase a deal for months or maybe even years. When the time comes that the deal is settled and there's a closing, and he's signed all the documents, and they slip the proceeds of the deal across to him in a check. He looks at the numbers to see that it's all right, see it's the right thing, but he can hardly wait to get out of there because he's got another deal working his mind, a better deal. He can't help himself. And they feel very unspiritual. He's done everything in the church. He served on the elder board. He's taught a Sunday school class. He's been a part of the building campaign. But there isn't a role in the church that comes even close to fulfilling his best ability. His best ability is creating wealth, is doing deals. Thinks about going to seminary. Maybe that would clear it up, no? Finally, he has to realize that this urge within me is something God planted there. And if I'm going to be faithful to it, I've got to give it my best, and I've got to do it in a way that will show the great command, loving God and loving my neighbor. And so that's what Bill is doing. He's over there tonight, making money. He's come to believe that the highest form of charity is making money with the poor. Not making money for the poor, not making money on the poor, making money with the poor. He's a wealth creator. I got a call from another friend, business guy, member of my church, and he said, "Hey, you know that old golf course out there in East Lake? Now, East Lake is one of our worst communities." I said, "Yeah, I've seen it. They closed it down." He said, "Yeah, it's been bankrupt." He said, "You know what? That used to be a famous golf course. That was world renowned." He said, "I got a wild idea." He said, "What if I buy that golf course and restore it to its 1930s grandeur? That was a home course of golf legend Bobby Jones. We could get his jackets and trophies, make that a monument to him." He said, "I think rich golfers all over the world would want to play there." He said, "We could use that as a cash cow to do transformative work in the whole community." He said, "If I do the golf course, will you do the neighborhood?" I said, "Well, I'd be interested in talking about it." Well, he called me a month later and he said, "I got it. Got the course. Let's get busy on the neighborhood." Right across the street from that golf course is a 650-unit public housing project that's one of his Atlanta's roughest. And that's one reason why the golf course went broke. Too many guys sticking their guns through the fence at the golfers to get their money. And so that deal maker restored that golf course to its prime condition in the early part of the century. And we got busy working on the public housing project and some other crack houses in the immediate area, and converted that 650 units into a mixed income development. 50% of the units for public housing residents and 50% for market rate residents. That's something HUD said will never work. But my friend, Tom, had contacts with, he had political contacts, very successful businessman. So he called Jimmy Carter and he said, if we could ask you to do one more thing for us, would you talk to HUD and convince them that this is a good idea? And so he did. And so the old project came down, and in its place, a mixed income development. And it worked so well that our housing authority director said, "You know, we've got to do this in all of our housing projects. Those are poverty compounds. If we have a mix of incomes, there'll be a socially healthy place to live, and plus the neighborhood will love it." And so she set about tearing down every one of the housing projects in Atlanta. All 25 of them are now gone, and in their place are attractive mixed income apartment communities. That's a person that's got the spiritual gift of deal making. And the church isn't quite sure what to do with them. There is in our society kind of two kinds of people. There are the wealth creators, and then there are the wealth processors. The wealth creators produce all the money that create jobs. The wealth processors set up all of the programs and services that are needed to make it a healthy community. For-profits and not-for-profits represent those two fundamental categories in our economy, the wealth creators and the wealth transfer. Business is the wealth creator. All the others exist on processing the wealth that's being created from business. Wealth creators create the employment. They fund the public sector. They fund our military. They fund our police. And all that is healthy in a society, our colleges, our schools, our churches, our recreation, our cultural centers, that's all as a result of wealth creation. And those of us in the social service area process that wealth. and create a healthy society. But without a flourishing economic environment, where the wealth creators don't have freedom to utilize their gifts, strip malls start to turn vacant. We don't have money to patch the potholes in our street. Property values decline. Symphonies stop their performances. Churches cut back their staff. Mission trips are canceled. The society scales back when we don't have an environment that is conducive to good economic development. It's kind of a strange thing that business creators, wealth creators, are kind of looked down on as less spiritual, less compassionate people. And the ones that are running the nonprofits tend to be held up as these are the real sacrificial Christians. I think it's a strange phenomenon. Maybe it's time to revisit our whole concept of our theologies of wealth making. Perhaps it's time to reinstate a respect for those that have the God-given capacity to create wealth. We know the negatives of that. We know the seductiveness of mammon. But the reality is you cannot have shalom in a society, that sense of well-being, health. You can't have shalom in a society that is devoid of wealth creators. Wealth creation is the wellspring out of which shalom can flow. We've got to admit to ourselves that as important as the nonprofits are, as important as the ministries are, as important as education is, that programs, the nonprofit world in itself will not bring communities out of poverty. They have to have jobs. And the primary job creators in a culture are business people. Only the nonprofit, only the for-profit businesses can produce the wealth and create the employment that creates shalom. If the poverty needle is ever going to move in a positive direction, that solution is going to lie ultimately with our wealth creators. Perhaps it's a time for us to learn to affirm them and make them our partners as well. Amen.